Do you wish that all things wealth and finance were much easier to understand and not presented by a bunch of beige cardigan-wearing geeks? Welcome to the Clever Investor Podcast, where we're dishing up the easiest to understand finance program served in bite-sized chunks, so your brain will thank you as your knowledge grows. Hosted by the brilliant Owen Taylor, a multiple award-winning expert with a glorious knack for explaining the complex world of wealth in the simplest of ways.
Hello, Clever Investors, and welcome to another show. In November 2022, we discovered that the world's population has now reached 8 billion people. And we were also told that Brisbane has been Australia's fastest growing city for the last 5 years, growing at a rate of 1.8% per annum, outpacing Sydney at 1.4 and Melbourne at 1.5. So this is a show all about being a clever investor. And my guest today is Johnny Becchiaris, who is one of the property research team at Blue Wells Property. And I've got Johnny here because I want to know what is the relevance of population growth and investment properties.
Hello, Owen. So as you said, Brisbane has been Australia's fastest growing city at 1.8% per annum. And if you look at the difference between that and, say, Melbourne, there's only a 0.3 difference, which doesn't sound like much, but
no, it doesn't, not at all.
Yeah, it's close to 8,000 people because you're talking from such a big pool of people.
So that is a big difference.
Yeah,
that's a lot of places to actually find people to live, and jobs for them to have.
Yeah, exactly right. And so there's the forecast over the next 10 years. There's actually a bit of a tide change because Melbourne is going to continue to keep its growth rate of 1.5% per annum. And Sydney and Brisbane are actually going to drop. Sydney's going to drop to 1% per annum, and Brisbane's going to drop to 1.3% per annum.
It's not a decline in the population of Sydney, but it's just not going to have that growth.
It's just increasing at a slower rate.
Yeah.
So it is still going to have a pretty good growth rate compared to most Western countries, but just slower than Melbourne.
So that means our population is going to be moving into different areas, and also, you know, migration from overseas are going to be choosing to live in the Melbourne area. Yeah,
well, Melbourne will actually outpace Sydney in terms of population size by 2030. I think they brought it forward a year because the original prediction was by 2031.
Yeah.
So that's actually come forward a year, and Melbourne is set to surpass Sydney.
And who's setting these figures then?
This is ABS.
This is ABS, so the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So
Correct.
This is definitely understands how to put these figures together.
Yeah, you'd hope so.
Yeah. So
if they're not getting it right, I don't think anyone's getting it right.
Yeah, it's not just the local newspaper guessing at this kind of stuff as well. And they're obviously doing this and working very much in from the. They're not politically driven, but they've obviously got to feed this back through to our governments then for how we house these people and how we move these people around, which is part of, I mean, I was in Melbourne recently seeing the amazing amount of work that they're actually doing in Melbourne.
Melbourne has almost a quarter of the entire infrastructure spending in Australia.
Wow.
In Victoria, not Melbourne.
In Victoria, okay,
yes.
All right. And yet Victoria is 3% of our land coverage.
Yeah, and they got almost a quarter, so I think it's something like 23% of total infrastructure spending, and that is to house this growing population.
Right. So because I think every time I catch a taxi from Melbourne Airport down into Melbourne, the taxi drivers will always complain about the traffic conditions. Because of all the roadworks.
Yep.
But this is a necessary pain that they have to go through because they're waiting for this population. You know,
short-term pain for long-term gain.
And it's not that far ahead, as you were saying, that Melbourne's population will be larger than Sydney's. We're in the end of 2022 at the moment as we record this.
8 years, not long at all. So you want to be chasing these areas that have the strong population growth because obviously population growing means more people need a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
and that increases the demand for property, ultimately driving prices up.
Right. So this is the classic of supply and demand.
Exactly.
And it links in with, so it's not just finding the cheapest property that you can. It's then, as your work is looking at whether there's going to be this ongoing demand, this long in certain areas.
And it goes vice versa, because the infrastructure spending is going to improve the drivability and livability of the area. So with these sort of improvements, it's actually going to drive more people to come and want to reside in these places.
So this is when a city such as Melbourne, when they are getting all the predictions, like from ABS and all of that, that's when they are, the bigger picture is they're working in with city planners on where are these people actually going to be living.
Yep.
And they're not just building housing in the middle of nowhere. It's then got to...
It's all strategical. You want to have it in and around or with access to employment hubs, because obviously people want to live close to where they're working. So this infrastructure is going to cater for that. It's going to bring people from the areas where the houses are being built, where the land is available. The infrastructure is going to bring them into those major employment hubs like the Melbourne CBD or all the hospitals in Melbourne or Werribee, these sort of places.
And is that when the infrastructure that goes in is not just building a roadway, when they're then looking at building, the schools and the shopping centres and such like this as well. And that's,
you also got to think of even something simple as transport infrastructure. Not only does it improve, I guess, the living standard and the way you move around a city, it also provides jobs, train drivers, etc. You're creating more reason for people to want to come and live in Melbourne, for example.
and these satellite areas that then pop up, you've obviously got people that are then working in these areas too, working in the shopping centres, the office buildings that go up, the transport. So it's not just creating jobs by building the roads, it's the long term that's going into these areas too.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's really exciting what's happening in Melbourne. I've been a big fan of Melbourne for many years, and just understanding the data, it really shows, you look on paper, that simple difference of 0.4% between, what Brisbane is at the moment and what Melbourne is, how many thousands of people, as you explained before.
Yeah.
Let's flip this over then. Where's the slowest growing cities?
Adelaide is the slowest. I think it was something like 0.8. Let me get the numbers up for you. So if we go through them, we got Melbourne forecasted at 1.5% per annum.
Yeah.
And then you got in second place Brisbane. So it's still going to be up there.
Yep.
Just no longer the fastest. And then there's Sydney at 1%.
Yeah.
And then you've got Hobart, Darwin and Canberra at 0.9%.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then Adelaide's on its own at 0.8%.
0.8%.
So Adelaide has the slowest forecast for population growth over the next 10 years.
Why is, the research opinion on why is Adelaide's really a lot lower than what we're going to see in Melbourne, whereas they're cousins, they're right next to each other?
Well, the difference between Adelaide and Melbourne is Melbourne was able to replace a lot of the manufacturing jobs that were lost over the past couple of decades.
Yeah.
They were able to replace it with obviously new work, whereas Adelaide has actually struggled to replace those manufacturing jobs because it was previously a heavy manufacturing workforce. So Adelaide's actually got a falling GDP. The reason, or one of the reasons for its slow population growth, could be its lack of job opportunity. Because, as we said before, people want to move to places where there is work and people want to go and live close to where they're working. So if there's no opportunity to work, people aren't going to be afford to live.
From an investor point of view as well, if your tenant can't find the employment that they want or the regular stability of it, it's easy for them to move, and that's part of the ease of holding your investment property long term, is that you're buying in an area where there is a good quantity and easy supply of employment.
Yeah, and speaking of long term, Adelaide actually saw some good growth over the past few years, as did the rest of the country.
Yeah,
and what we do is a good way to mitigate the the artificial growth, could you call it, from cheap money and low interest rates. And so we're identifying areas that have demand for property beyond affordability, beyond it being cheap to buy there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that personally, Adelaide is one of the best bang for your buck places to go and start a family and things like that. It's an amazing, a beautiful place to visit. If
I'm still yet to go there.
Yeah, if you haven't been, go there. It is beautiful. The especially the wine country is absolutely. But even Adelaide, it's so easy to drive around. And I think if you were freshly married and about to start, on the 2.3 kids and a Labrador and a station wagon, Adelaide, amazing bang for your buck.
Yeah.
An area. But from an investment property point of view, I agree with you then as well. It just is. There are places with better fundamentals than it as well, but it's not casting a shadow over it's a terrible place at all. No, I've got lots of great friends in Adelaide. We're looking at a business. We're looking at a business model here, aren't we, when we're interrogating all of these numbers?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So ultimately, we've had a slowdown in construction over the last couple of years, nationwide, for various different reasons. Certainly in southeast Queensland, has been recovering from floods and storms and such like that, and some of that workforce going into repairing the towns and the established houses in the area, and then because of COVID, we saw the price of materials go up considerably.
Yeah.
Does that then play into when we're looking at this growth of properties as well?
Well, of course, it's back to, as we said before, it's that simple supply and demand model. If developers aren't building, there's going to be a lack of supply. And with a growing population, I think we actually increased our skilled migrant intake by about 20,000 people.
Yeah,
earlier this year.
Yeah, we have.
So that's another.
Well done, Alba.
Yeah, another demand side push with these population forecasts, which are some of the best in the world, alongside a decreasing supply. That's the recipe for rising prices.
It takes time for all those little bits of data to filter through, and for this, even for skilled people to come in and sort of
although
retrain
the market's sort of cooled off due to rising rates, you can see the supply and demand effect on rents.
Yeah,
we've seen rents go crazy over the past 2 years. And that's due to a lack of supply and an increase in demand. And what I think will happen is, as rents increase and property values don't, then you got yields that are going to start rising. So all of a sudden you're getting yields at 5 or 6%, and investors are finding it, property's lucrative again. Investors are jumping in, and there's another demand side.
Yeah, and this I guess is the strength of when even myself, when I look at the data that you can then bring to me and present to us, it's a lot of people are then reacting and too late when a market has already literally boomed or peaked.
Yeah.
But by using data, we can look at a market which is actually moving into its growth stage, moving into potential. As I've always joked about, if it's in the Daily Telegraph, it's already happened.
Yeah.
You've missed the market. You've missed the market. So when the media's got it there, and that's often unfortunate when people will be buying into that market, is when it's already actually it's at its peak. Yeah. It's the same with shares as well. You don't want to buy the shares when they're on their way up, right? And not when they're at their peak. It's one of the fundamentals. So that was very interesting. Thank you, Johnny, for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
I've got to get you back for more of this stuff as well. Yes. I love the data stuff that you do. If anybody's got any questions about what we've presented today, you can email me here at Owen at the Clever Investor podcast. Thank you for joining.
Thank you once again for having me.
I'll see everybody again on next week's edition of the Clever Investor podcast.
You have been listening to the Clever Investor podcast, proudly sponsored this week by Blue Wealth Property. Are you ready to start a new investment journey? Get in touch with the industry leaders, Blue Wealth Property. Blue Wealth have a proven track record in using research to identify growth markets And Blue Wealth have supported thousands of Australians to buy the right property in the right market at the right time. Go to bluewealth.com.au.